Morning came slowly to Cypress Terrace Camp. The cypress trees stood tall and quiet along the edge of the lake, their long gray moss drifting softly whenever the wind moved through them. The sky had turned a clear pale blue, and the first warmth of the sun was beginning to lift the coolness from the ground. Our days of rest were over. You could feel it in the camp, even before anyone said anything. Boots appeared beside bedrolls. Packs were opened and closed again as people checked straps and buckles. Someone shook out a blanket near the porch railing, sending a small cloud of dust into the morning air. Saturday and Sunday had done their work. Blisters had been treated, straps repaired, socks dried, packs reorganized. Even the small aches that had always seemed to gather in one's shoulders and hips after days of walking had softened. The road was calling again. David was the first one ready. He sat near the edge of the clearing on a low log, Bible still open in his lap, reading quietly while the camp slowly woke around him. The morning light reflected off the lake and flickered across the pages. Pearl lay stretched beside him with the full confidence of a dog who knows she belongs exactly where she is. Agnes had curled herself into a neat circle against Pearl's warm side. I watched them for a moment and smiled. There is something deeply peaceful about animals sleeping near Scripture. Mom stepped out of the lodge a few moments later carrying two tin cups. She spotted me immediately. Tea, she asked. Yes, please. She handed me one and leaned against the porch rail beside me. For a while, we simply watched the camp wake up. Sean emerged next, rubbing the back of his neck as though he had slept on something that disagreed with him. Liam followed, still looking slightly dazed. Sean noticed David. Already studying? He asked. Mom nodded toward him. He's been up a while. Sean shook his head. I need more spiritual maturity. You need more coffee, Mom said. Across the clearing, Lucia was already sitting with her notebook open. Her pencil moved across the page quickly, capturing the curve of the lake and the thin reflections of the cypress trees. Claire stood nearby, watching the water. Francis was walking slowly along the edge of the clearing, hands folded loosely in his sleeves, occasionally stopping to examine a stone or leaf as though the ground itself had something to teach him. The desert father sat on a flat rock near the fire pit, as still as he had been the first morning we met him. Eventually, David closed his Bible and stood. Friends, he said gently. Everyone began drifting toward the fire. The flames had already been coaxed back to life, and a small kettle hung above them. Someone passed around the last of the morning bread. David looked around at the group. Last night we talked about courage, he said. Several heads nodded. Sean leaned forward. The verse about fear. Yes. David opened the Bible again. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. He read it once more. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and discipline. The wind moved softly through the trees. For the next part of our journey, he said, I think we're going to see several different kinds of courage. Francis nodded slightly. Courage is a large word. David smiled. Yes, it is. He closed the Bible again. But remember this, he said. The courage God gives doesn't come from personality. It comes from his spirit. He looked out toward the hills beyond the camp, and the road will give us opportunities to learn that. We finished breakfast quietly after that. Packs were lifted, straps tightened. Mom gave Liam's hill one last inspection before he put his boot back on. Still good, she said. Thanks to you. Dad hoisted his own pack and reached for Mom's hand automatically. The two of them had fallen into that habit years ago, and it seemed to follow them everywhere. Pearl stood and stretched. Agnes leaped down from the log and began investigating the trail ahead. Sean looked down at the small polecat. She's scouting. She's curious, Claire said calmly. Those are not the same thing. Agnes puffed slightly and bounded into the grass. The path beyond the camp climbed gently out of the clearing and into the open hills. Within a few minutes, the lake had disappeared behind us. The land here rolled outward in long, grassy ridges dotted with low stones and occasional stands of trees. A narrow shepherd's path wound through the hills like a pale thread. The wind was stronger once we left the shelter of the cypress trees. It moved through the grass in wide waves. For a while, we walked quietly. The rhythm of walking often does that to a group. Conversation fades until the sounds of boots and wind become the main language of the road. Lucia eventually moved up beside me. I keep thinking about Chet, she said. So do I. She looked out across the hills. It's strange. What is? I didn't feel sad when he left. I nodded. I know what you mean. It felt peaceful. That was exactly the word. 2 nights earlier, we had watched him pick up his pack and walk down the dark trail. No hesitation, no drama, just quiet certainty. Lucia tucked her notebook under her arm. I keep thinking about what he said. Which part? I am willing. We walked a little farther before I answered. That's a very old prayer. Francis had drifted close enough to hear us. It is the prayer of every saint, he said gently. Lucia looked thoughtful. Is it something you practiced? Francis smiled. In a way. How? By saying yes in smaller moments. The wind pressed against our backs as we climbed the next ridge. Lucia considered that. So courage grows slowly. Usually. Francis glanced toward the hills ahead, though sometimes it arrives all at once. Sean, who had been walking a little behind us, spoke up. I'm still thinking about the Bible study. What about it? Liam asked. Sean shrugged. The part about fear. Dad looked over. Which part? That fear isn't always wrong? Dad nodded. That's true. He gestured toward the rocky slope we were descending. Fear can keep you from stepping somewhere dangerous. Sean kicked a stone off the path, but sometimes it also keeps you from doing the right thing. That's where courage comes in, Dad said. The Desert Father's voice drifted forward from behind us. Fear is a messenger. Everyone slowed slightly to hear him. It tells you that something important is happening. Lucia glanced back. So fear isn't the enemy? No. The old monk walked steadily beside us. The question is whether fear becomes your master. The path widened slightly as we crossed a shallow valley. In the distance, a flock of sheep moved slowly across a hillside. Their bells drifted faintly through the wind. Pearl noticed them immediately. Her ears perked up, and she looked toward Sean as if waiting for instructions. Not today, he told her. Agnes popped up from the grass nearby and stared at the sheep with intense curiosity. Claire picked her up before she could begin a very bad idea. That would not end well, Claire said to her. Agnes looked offended. Lucia laughed. The path began climbing again after that. The hills stretched farther south now, their colors shifting from bright spring green to the more muted tones of drier land. The wind grew sharper. After an hour or so, Francis slowed and turned to face the group. There is something interesting about courage, he said. Everyone gathered loosely around him. It rarely appears where we expect it. Sean crossed his arms. Meaning? Francis gestured toward the road ahead. Some people show courage by speaking loudly. He pointed toward the hills behind us. Some show it by suffering quietly. His gaze moved across the group, and some show it by simply continuing the journey. Lucia looked down at the path beneath her feet. I think I'm beginning to understand. Francis smiled. That is how courage grows. The wind carried the faint sound of sheep bells again. Somewhere, beyond the next ridge, the road continued south, leading us deeper into the wide Syrian hills. And as we walked, the words from last night's scripture seemed to travel with us. God has not given us a spirit of fear, only the steady road beneath our feet.